Hello, and welcome to the Southcoast Artist Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more.
Welcome back to another episode of In Focus. The In Focus podcasts are brought to you by the artistindex.com. And with us today is our guest. I'll let her introduce herself in just a moment properly. How do you say your first name?
Dena.
Okay, and how's that spelled?
It's D-E-N-A.
It's D-E-N-A.
Yeah.
Okay. And your last name?
Is Hayden.
Hayden.
And it's H-A-D-E-N.
H-A-D-E-N.
Yeah. People always throw a Y in there.
A Y in there. Yeah, I'm just scratching that out now. And the reason why I ask is because this is for, historical record.
Yeah.
And also, too, that we've had some, crickets after I ask this question of every guest. But sometimes there are people who walk around having their name pronounced in a way that they don't is not correct, and they've just given up.
Definitely, yeah.
Like you, okay, if you want to put a Y in Hayden, go right ahead. That kind of thing.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
So, Dena, you wear a couple of hats then. I hear you're a sculptor.
Yes. So I wear a lot of different hats. My background and my education is in fine arts, so in painting and then I went on to get my MFA, and then that's when I started making more sculptures and installation-based work.
Okay.
So I'm primarily an artist, but with my own career, I've gotten into more like art organization and development, community development.
Okay, so basically you fall under the tab, the heading of art industry professional.
Yes, yeah.
Because it is an industry. It's amazing. I mean, now and some of the majors are changing in college now too. They've melded some of the marketing aspects into the fine arts, which is kind of interesting.
It is, yeah. And I don't think when I was in at least undergrad, I didn't even know about an option to study anything in terms of the art industry or
art management. That's the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure when that came online, but I felt like I wasn't aware of it then.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I would have studied it. It's something that naturally and gradually happened in my career.
Yeah, and I've got another question for you, but it just popped in my head, like sports management. There's a
that's a good comparison.
Well, it's the same thing. Where'd you go to school?
I went to UMass Dartmouth for my undergraduate, and then the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia for my master's.
Wow. Okay. Now you have been associated with, and I'll let you tell the story, with the Co-Creative Center in New Bedford. Could you tell us, number one, what your title is, and number two, just exactly what is the Co-Creative Center?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the director of the Co-Creative Center. We opened our doors July 2018, so we've been open for about a year and a half now. And the Co-Creative Center is a shared workspace for artists and designers or anyone working in the creative industry. It's a membership-based organization. But we also have several events and a gallery in the front. So we try to have public events and public engagements to bring in the community into the space to expose them to art and have them engaged and things like that. So the goal of the Co-Creative Center is to build kind of create a hub in the downtown area for the arts and for artists.
Okay. How unusual is this kind of a center, or is this something that comes from other cities as well?
There are other organizations like this in major cities like Boston, New York, Philadelphia. I think it's rare in smaller cities like New Bedford or the gateway cities in Massachusetts, although our project is funded, the build-out was funded partially by Mass Development, and Mass Development has a grant opportunity for gateway cities to create shared workspaces. So I think we'll see more and more come online.
Okay. Shared workspaces, that seems to be to set up a red flag in some people's minds for shared workspaces, not so much, but shared artist workspaces.
Mm-hmm.
How's that working out?
Red flags in terms of like
that
an
artists don't
wanna
share, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so definitely we have studios in the basement that we allocate like a certain area and it's your studio, but everything's open. We don't have any walls in between.
Like
anything.
A cubicle kind of setup?
Like a bay area. I think that it doesn't work for some artists, and it's definitely not in alignment with their practice. But for many other artists, they're looking for community and to be around other people because, as you know, as an artist, you're isolated a lot in your studio working, and it works as a hub to engage with other artists and creatives to either get ideas or just be working around other people and not alone. So it's kind of like the flip side of what you would think as a traditional artist working in a studio.
Okay. Yeah, I just finished doing 2 sessions over the past 2 weeks with artist and former UMass faculty member Pam Haas.
Oh, yeah.
Sitting for a portrait, and her idea was that where her studio is at the Hatch Street Studios, there are 60 plus. I mean, the number ranges all over the place. I've heard as high as 80 at one point.
Yeah.
But she said, you'd think with all these artists in the building, you'd see and interact with each other.
I know.
And no,
I know.
everybody goes in a little studio space, and that's it.
I know, and I've experienced that myself in studio buildings in New Bedford and in Somerville, in Philadelphia too. You just kind of go to your studio, shut the door, and you go to work. And so I remember that feeling of looking for a community and being excited to join a studio space or a mill space that had other artists around you, but it actually felt even worse because you're working alone in your studio knowing that there are other artists working around you, but there was no interaction. So it was kind of like odd. Like it left you kind of feeling more isolated, I would say.
I'm getting more and more the feeling that the model is almost the retirement homes where you actually need to have an activities director and everything.
Yeah, you have to, right. And that's you really do need someone to catalyze interaction. And even if it's something simple like having a coffee hour on Fridays at like 4. I mean, so it doesn't have to be rocket science. It's just like setting a structure for interaction, really. And that doesn't necessarily happen a lot in like other studio buildings. There isn't a management component like that. Yeah.
I also heard that in other cities there are these meetups specifically for artists. It's almost like speed dating, but for artists.
Yeah.
And they also have these critique circuits.
Yes.
Where you apply or subscribe or whatever, and then I guess they draw your name out of a hat or whatever, because that could go on forever. And so monthly they get together and they have, because that's one of the things that when we graduate with our degrees, we don't get that thing that we used to hate when we were in school. Probably, a lot of people don't like critiques, and a lot of people really liked critiques, but regardless, when you leave school, you don't get a choice.
No, right. And that's what I actually am also the director of a critique group in Boston. Okay. It's called the Boston Critique Group. Okay. And that's been run, I know it's pretty simple. Yeah. But it's all completely just like a community of artists. It's now about at like 100. It started about 10 years ago when I took it over because the woman that started it moved away. But when I first moved back to Boston after grad school, I just hit a wall, and you don't really realize in academia how much you're surrounded by that community of peers that are artists, and you can always ask someone for feedback on something you're creating. So you kind of get used to having that. And then after graduate school, I was just working a regular job, and I really felt the lack of an art community. And that's really when all the gears started turning. I was like, the community is the most important aspect, at least for me in my practice. When I create work, I usually create work alone, but I had to have that dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because about the only support really traditionally around here, or as of the last 20, 30 years, I guess, it's the inside joke. There's that same 20 group of artists who go from one opening to another.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for them, there'd be nobody else at the opening.
Yeah, I see a lot of movement and development with that, which is great and exciting, especially in the area. I think a lot of artists in Boston and other cities can't afford to live there anymore or afford a studio. So I do see a lot of artists moving to the area. So our goal at the Co-Creative Center is to kind of like harness that and have a space where other people, even that are just moved here, can meet other artists. So it's start to like build that network and to keep artists here as long as we can create like a fertile ground for them to
it's almost
their
like
practice.
Back in the days of immigration, where they had the welcome house,
where
you got people acclimated, indoctrinated, whatever you call it. This is really kind of interesting.
It's a good comparison.
Yeah, because and as I do these podcasts, it's a really good experience for the amount of information and the exchange of ideas. I spent 40 years in advertising and marketing because success isn't about luck; it's about timing. And it seems like every time there was a recession, I was just poised to do something, or I was affected by it. So prevented from moving forward, or prevented from moving sideways, or whatever. And so seeing all of this, and now other models, this is kind of interesting. Are you planning on doing a critique group or starting one through the Co-Creative Center?
Yeah, we just launched it in November. So it's actually led by a community member, Midori Evans, and so the next one is December 10th in the evening. I think it starts at 5. It's 5 to 7. We're going to be doing it monthly, and it's free and open to the public.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you select? Well, is there again, it's the mechanicals, the time limit for each artist, the number of pieces to be?
Yeah.
Obviously no less than one.
Yeah. So we just kicked it off here. So we had, I think it was 4 people, so that's not an issue.
Yeah.
But the crit group in Boston that I run, it's very time. So you come in, and I usually just get a count of the work that's there, and we usually do the critique in 2 hours, and then depending on how much work is being shown, you get that time frame, and so it's usually not under 10 minutes. And then we just set a timer. Go. You can talk about your work. You don't have to talk about your work. So you can kind of do what you'd like, set it up in the structure you'd like for that amount of time you have.
Yeah.
And that's it. And we just move on to the next one. But that's like the core structure of our monthly meetings. But again, like from there, and just like the Co-Creative Center, there's other opportunities that come from meeting one another. So I've seen a lot of artists collaborate, exhibit their work, get a teaching job from each other. So that's just like the framework for interweaving all of the connections that are needed as an artist to build your career.
Okay. When you came into the studio, you asked about the paintings on the wall, and I told you that Jeff Watton, the co-creator along with me of the Artists Index, and this concept of podcasting, and eventually we're going to be doing video and such. But we're trying to index every living artist in the city. That's our goal.
That's awesome.
And it seems like a simple idea, but it's like really, it has a lot of moving parts to it.
Yeah.
And so at least getting everyone stimulated, hopefully, through these podcasts is one thing. But rather than having your traditional gallery opening here, using this space as an alternative gallery space, I thought maybe we could have business networking for artists where we could have 2 talks, neither longer than 10 minutes, have the artists themselves speak about their work or speak to their work. And then having an art industry professional, a curator, a gallerist, art historian, organizational director, art manager, art consultant, I mean, it just goes on, do a 10-minute talk, and then hopefully to get a new blood in for every one of the openings.
Yeah.
And then, of course, have the prerequisite nibbles and beverages.
I think that's a great idea.
And that would help people network, obviously, exchange business cards and websites, and stimulate more cross-feeding and in the area. One of the things that let me ask you the question rather than me make the statement first. Working with artists nearly every day, and seeing probably more artists than most artists see in a given month or longer. What is the biggest challenge that most artists face?
I would say that the biggest challenge is figuring out how to make a living while creating your work. It's a constant battle of having enough financial stability to actually get into your practice and make the work that you want to make. It seems like a constant battle in a way for a lot of artists. It's not easy to make a living off of your work. So it's like having that determination to keep on practicing with all of the waves of the wax and waning of your other parts of your career. And so that, you might have to put your work on hold for a couple months if you have another project that can make X number of dollars. So it's really being an artist is multifaceted, and there are a lot of different hats you have to wear, even just in your art practice. So like marketing your work, getting your work out there, and creating. But for most artists, we like to be creating and making work in the studio. So you have this internal drive to be creative, and sometimes you have to put kind of like harness that to the side and get set yourself up to document your work, market your work, or do another side gig to get you through. So it's a constant balancing act. And I see that a lot of artists find that challenging, and they can lose grip of their own practice and then stop making work, because it's challenging to make a living.
It is, yeah, it is. So there is the economic and financial, I hate to use the classic word, but struggle.
Yeah.
Which is there. And then you said something quite interesting, to make the work they want to make, which I'm going to assume that there are many artists who are making work that one of my professors, Ed Tonieri, referred to as bread and butter work.
Yeah.
It's the work that sells. It's not exactly the esoteric stuff that you learned in school, but it pays the bills.
Yeah.
How many artists, in your estimation, are doing that kind of thing? And what is it that they're doing for this bread and butter?
I see a lot of artists doing commission work. But I also see some artists that have, they have 2 streams of work, like what you were saying. Right. One is in the realm of their practice, but a little bit more sellable, or something they could put out in the market a little bit easier. Selling on different platforms that are not a gallery, in selling that type of work. But then they can also focus on the work that they feel called to make and can reflect on as an artist. And then I also see a lot of artists that are graphic designers and or do a little bit more design work to support their art practice, or in other industries like construction or photography. So like just kind of like dabbling in other fields that they can be creating.
Similar or fields within the sphere of the arts, but not exactly within their selected or preferred discipline.
Yeah. And obviously there's a lot of artists that are teachers. So that career seems to marry being an artist and having an art practice with a teaching schedule, where you're still involved in the practice of art making and educating. So it seems like that kind of works out for a lot of people.
Yeah, that was always the ultimate twinning.
Yeah.
Even back when in fact, that was the reason why I was told you have to get yourself an MFA.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I was asked that question, so what are you going to do once you get your BFA? I said, well, set up a studio and paint. I'm like, well, it's not that easy.
I know.
It's not that easy.
I know.
There's also a word, too, that you've used that it's only been mentioned once or twice in the podcast that I find kind of interesting because it brings a seriousness, and I don't mean like a somberness, but a seriousness to the practice of art, and that's practice. Because lawyers have practices, doctors have practices, but what did artists have?
Yeah.
And
it is, I mean, that's how I've seen it. And
right.
Yeah.
It's newspeak, but it seems to...
It is. It's like, and I think because having the practice isn't necessarily, it's part of the journey, not the actual outcome. So it's dedicating yourself to your own art practice and whatever that might be. And so I always tell a lot of younger artists too, it's like any relationship you would have, like you have to foster it in certain ways, and it's a living thing, or I try to think of it as a living thing that you need to pay attention to. And one of my teachers, when I left grad school, she was a very hard teacher, very critical. And at the end of our 2 years, she said, the only goal I have is that you have all the tools you need to continue your practice. And that really set in my head, because it wasn't really, every time she critiqued my work or we had a discussion, it wasn't really about the finished painting or finished sculpture. It really was dialoguing around your practice and what I was trying to do as an artist. So that's so important, and I think having conversations around that is really helpful.
Yeah, it definitely is. We spoke about artist networking, which is a good thing, and a lot of that is probably because of the isolation suffered by so many artists. Even when you put them all together in the same building, they're still isolated.
Yeah.
But the other aspect to that is that they're still somewhat isolated in community because, I've said it several times already on these podcasts, in Europe, people say, hi, my name is, what's your name? What do you do? Oh, you're a painter? Have I seen your work? Is your work hanging currently someplace?
Yeah.
Can I see your work? I mean, that kind of enthusiasm.
Engagement.
Here, do you make a living doing that? It's a completely different thing. So now, even though the artist community has expanded probably like we've never seen before, we're still isolated from everybody else in some ways. Isn't that kind of weird?
It is weird, and that's one of my personal goals, is to integrate the arts into the fabric of the city and the community and the region. So that being an artist is part of every conversation, and it's not pigeonholed and isolated and pushed to the side, or the artist communities aren't on the whatever,
the periphery,
area. So that's why the Co-Creative Center, the location is really key. It's right downtown. and it's in the middle of the fabric of the city, so we have a lot of crossing over of different industries. But I do agree with you. Like, it's a mindset, and in this area, that's kind of how the conversation usually does go. It's like you tell someone you're an artist, and then they're just like worried about you or something like right away.
Exactly. And those are the nice ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so when I moved to Philly, I felt the same way you were saying about being in Europe. It was when I told someone that I was a painter or an artist, it was an engaging conversation, and it was like I told them that I don't know, that I was a carpenter or something like that. It was just like a career, and it wasn't mind-blowing that I was doing that. You know what I mean? And that's what I had chosen to focus on.
Yeah.
So it seemed more, the arts are integrated into the city more there. I felt more included in the fabric of the city and not like an outcast.
Yeah, the outcast thing too. And that's another thing too. There's so many stereotypes and prejudices that still exist. People expect you to have multicolored hair, cut in various ways, and I don't know, just be totally visible.
Yeah, right, on the exterior, like that you're supposed to be wearing
your art on you.
Yeah, and so I think there's a lot of myths to like break down, and again, like around building community around that, having word of people talking about these things and word of mouth, and saying, oh, like I didn't know you're a poet, I'm a poet too, and cool, you're gonna do spoken word, maybe I could come. So like it's very simple, and it's just like giving platforms for people to come together to like validate what we all do and spend our time doing, and building community around the work that we do. So I just see the value in all those small connections. Yeah.
Is there anything that the Co-Creative Center is doing or can do to, I don't know, inoculate the community at large as to the arts?
I know. I guess like right now we have a lot of public events, like I was saying. So we're trying to reach all different mediums. So we do a lot of music shows, poetry. We have some DJing nights, things like that. We have the gallery, and then art talks, things like that. So just trying to hit all of the different facets involving the arts, and opening up to the public to hopefully bring in more and more of the community and kids and families, the people that live in the city, and try to get them involved and say, like, hey, like we're creating paper flowers, you're welcome to join us. And so just kind of like, I think what it is showing up consistently and just being there for people to come to the space. And it's like keeping that consistent so that anyone that lives in the city or is visiting, that they know that they can come to the Co-Creative Center to access the arts in some way, shape, or form, depending on what we're doing. Yeah.
Going back to what you were talking about earlier about wearing many hats. Again, we've had these conversations. I remember just a few years back, we would laugh and say, oh yeah, I get 50% of my easel time and the other 50% is marketing. And now, by God, I think it's shrunk down to probably maybe 15%.
I know.
The rest of the time is messing around with social media, networking, doing all those other things, the bread and butter work, and that gets to be a little frustrating.
I know. It's so hard to balance that.
Well, if we go back to the Renaissance period, medieval and then Renaissance with a guild system, I'm wondering if there's anybody who's considering writing a grant where you get, high school students or young, undergraduates in a BFA program to subsidize them
Right.
to and then place them with a master.
I know.
Because wow, it would be great for them.
Yep.
And it would be great for the master. I mean, and you and I are both
Benefiting.
masters.
Yeah.
We have MFAs. In fact, it's weird because when I lived in Portugal with an MFA, they referred to me as Dr. Fortier. And my mother used to laugh all the time. Oh, Dr. Fortier.
That is so funny.
Yeah, but
well,
again,
it's a terminal degree.
it's a
in the
terminal
field,
degree. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. But seriously, if you could imagine just the amount of the workload that would take off of the master, because if you look at these Caravaggio was completely insane and always running from the law. But if you look at the studio of Michelangelo, Da Vinci. They had assistants who filled in.
Yeah.
Hey, paint me the sky.
Yeah,
I'll go in and touch it up later, right? That kind of idea, because that took a lot of time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't exactly creative; it was more decorative. But being really serious about this, where it would be fantastic for young people who are considering a career in art when they're in high school. It'd be fantastic for undergraduate BFAs to ally themselves with a master, and it would be fantastic for the master now, because now their output would increase.
I know.
Who knows? I mean, if it just increased
No, that's a
twice.
great idea. Yeah, I will have to check that out. I'm sure there's something out there. I mean, we work a lot with schools, so they'll come in for a tour or do projects in the space, meet the artists and things like that, help them create a painting. But those are one-off kind of things. And I do agree, it needs to be more integrated into an opportunity, a one-on-one opportunity that is over a certain time frames, that you're getting that learning from the artist, but also helping and assisting in creating the work would be great.
even if it becomes I don't even want to say an elective, it would be a required part of course structure.
Yeah.
Where an assistantship now does not necessarily mean teaching, because let's face it,
I know.
not every artist is a teacher.
Yeah, and you could be it's even in that sense, and there's a teacher in a very formal academic sense, but I know a lot of artists are teachers in their own way, and they seem to always be educating people on how what their process is, or it's there's different forms of teaching too, which is similar to the Co-Creative Center. A lot of the artists that are part of the center are not formal teachers, but they hold some workshops or they're exchanging ideas. So it's that kind of, or more organic education, I guess I would say, that sometimes allows for more growth and a little bit more room to experiment, which would be similar to what you're speaking to.
Okay. Now, it's been 18 months approximately for the Co-Creative Center downtown. What have you accomplished in those 18 months? Not to put you on the spot, but I mean,
Well, I think we opened our doors with $0 in income or revenue, so we've been able to get off the ground, stay afloat, and that was my main goal, is to kick it off and financially make it stable enough where we could stay open. We're at that point, which is good. We need to grow more and grow in membership, and also bring in some more grant funding and things like that if we can. Our goal is to keep the membership low enough where we're creating access to artists and the creatives that we want to be able to be part of the space. I guess for me personally, the most important thing that has happened is that it seems like our members and the community have, they have put their own energy into the center and have taken ownership of it in a certain way where they feel like it's their little hub, their hub too, their creative hub. So I do not create, maybe 75% of the programming comes out of the members and out of from the community. So it has created kind of like a space where people can actually put into motion some things that they've been thinking about for years, or so it's like it's been able to like harness certain ideas and to be a space for creative endeavors that is not just coming from me. And that's the most important thing for me, is that it's living on beyond like what I'm kind of pushing into it. At first it was getting the ball rolling, and then once the ball is rolling, other people have joined in and jumped in and contributed so much to the center. So that's a success in my mind.
What do you see in the upcoming, let's just stick to a year. I mean,
Yeah, the next year, I do see us having some more structured programming for artists, like classes, things like that, education around the business of art too. And so having some more programming that's structured and open and free to the public. And we'll also increase our membership. Right now we have 50 members, so I'd like to increase that, hopefully double it by the end of the year, and then we'll probably be at our max for the space. And just to continue to build the networks around each art form, so around the music, writing, poetry, and the visual art, so to keep the momentum and stabilize the center more financially.
Okay. I was just thinking, I don't know if it's anything that is of value to the center, but in speaking with a lot of people of a certain age who are not artists, but who are interested in art and have always been, because they were exposed to the Saturday morning art classes at the old Swain School of Design.
Yeah.
And it remains a very highly emotional event in their lives. And because of that, and they have sought the same thing for their own children.
Yeah.
And are kind of disappointed that they can't find anything like that.
I know. No, that is a very good point. And that's what I guess has been surprising to me. I didn't, I highly regard art classes and drawing classes, and I've always wanted to be involved, even when I was little. But how the community has really grasped onto the different workshops we've had and hosted, we've had a lot of people attend them, and with minimal marketing. I'm the only one at the center right now, so the marketing's not the best it could be, but so people really want to come out and engage in creating work with their kids. So every AHA night we do an art activity, and there's a lot of families that come out consistently and bring their kids to create work together. So there definitely is a need for that, and an interest.
Yeah. I mean, just personally, I've had several events or situations where a child made my day by looking at my work and completely unabashed, completely open and honest.
I know.
Is going on about my work, and I'm standing there going, wow. Or Jeff's daughter did this incredible abstract piece, and Jeff said, I think you inspired Sophie.
Aww.
And he sent me the piece, and I was like,
wow.
This is good. I don't think anybody, without knowing her gender or her age, could have figured out that this was done by a little girl, to use that term.
Wow.
It was that good. And, you see so much of that vitality and such at that age. And then, we all have that deep, dark episode where somebody comes along and says, it's time to put that play stuff away and get serious and figure out how you're going to make a living.
Yeah, exactly. And even adults just have like that free creative time where you're maybe just doodling is important, and everyone can do that and participate in that. So just watching families come, and the parents are also like really into what they're making, and you as an artist, I think we can get in the mindset like, well, we have, as an artist, you have materials, you have pencils, whatever, paint. Other people don't have that at home, or they haven't sought out to have it or accessible. So having it out on a table and some paper or a project is actually helpful because it gets them going and gets them creating.
Yeah. It's almost like we need a call for artists, non-professionals, a doodle exhibit.
Yeah, exactly.
Doodles.
Yeah.
Share your doodles.
Yeah, totally. No, and I love talking to other people that don't consider themselves artists, but most people draw or doodle or have some sort of creative outlet.
Yeah. Does the center have a signature event yet, or?
I guess I would say our monthly event we do is on a high night. It's called Community. So it's a space to gather. We have that collaborative art project, and the gallery opening, a DJ, and herbal tea. So it's just about having like a healthy environment to bring the community together, make art, enjoy music. So it's kind of like a crossover between all of our disciplines. And we have poetry during that night too, and an open mic. So that's what we've been doing monthly. Besides that, we have just different workshops and programs that pop up, but nothing really consistent except the AHA night, the community.
Yeah. If you had a magic wand or a boatload of cash, and you were allowed to just spend that boatload of cash on one thing or use that magic wand for one wish, what would it be for the Co-Creative Center?
That is... I would love to have more shared resources and equipment for our members. And also, again, like I had said, set up programming that we could pay someone to come in or the expertise to come in and do. And then I would love to also, this is a pipe dream, but I would love to have a fund to be able to allocate certain funds to members or artists in the community to do certain projects. But I always hear about artists come in and they'll tell me about this idea, but they don't have enough funding to do it. And so I think it would be really cool to have a sort of like project fund for artists to be able to help support them financially in the work that they want to do too. Yeah. And also to have one other, right now it's just myself, so I can't execute everything I'd love to do, so having another person on board would be helpful. I think to kind of like make sure we're getting everything done and being as effective as we can be.
It's interesting too, because the idea of all these ideas that, if you look at this light bulb, and the light bulb gets brighter and brighter, and then the reality of finances and capabilities, and it just starts to dull out again. And it would almost be, again, just a thought based on what you were saying, to have someone who basically just collected financial information. In other words, have a grant writer who becomes a line item on the grant, obviously for their troubles, and says, okay, you just fill out this, really basic form. Like, for example, the artist index. This is a project that we need help on. I mean, it's become great, but it's like having a puppy. We got to keep an eye on it all the time.
Right. Yeah, and it's exactly.
It's got to be fed. It's got to be. It's got to be loved. You got to make sure it doesn't go off and do something on its own. Without supervision and so on and so forth. But to have something like that, because a lot of artists don't have the wherewithal. Plus, too, it's a lot easier now. But I've been grant averse for a long time, because once upon a time, it was, oh my God, it was horrible. You would spend months and months and months on the grant, and there's no guarantee you're going to get anything. And if you did, you did all that work for $500.
I know.
Thank you.
I know. And it's, and that's like, that's where I see like a gap, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a gap within it. And it's, artists are not in this area. It's hard to sell your work for a certain amount of money consistently to make a living unless you're exhibiting other places. But I think if you're an artist starting out, it's difficult. And to get a grant is very challenging and competitive. So there's a gap. There's also a lot of artists don't really know how to write a grant, or the time it takes to write a grant is so much more than a professional grant writer.
Exactly.
So there's this gap.
Yeah.
And I'm just always trying to think of how to feed that to keep artists living in the city and working here. And that's what I've seen throughout the years. Sometimes it ends up in artists moving to another city where they can easily do whatever, like bartend or any side job, and then do their own art practice. So, and have more of a network to sell their work. So it's a challenge. I think it's challenging right now. The one positive I see of that is a lot of creatives are supporting each other, which is great to see. So I see somewhat like we have an artist who's an event designer and planner hiring a lot of other artists within our community. So it's like keeping the network flowing where other creatives are hiring other creatives, which I think that in itself is one of those gap kind of financial pluses, that if we can kind of hire within the community, think local, you know what I mean, in terms of like, who is a editor, graphic designer, marketer, website designer, illustrator, and if we can keep feeding the local economy with the creatives that live within the city, you could find, I'm always surprised how many photographers are out there, so it's like it's very abundant.
Yeah. I mean, one of the questions I was going to ask you was about silos, because at one point in time there were silos. I mean, you had this institution, that had its very high walls, and you had this institution, and they were both vying for the same finite resources. And then also having run an advertising agency here in the city, and being told, well, if you were that good, you'd be in Boston. And I would always respond, yes, and if I were, you couldn't afford me.
Right. Yeah, no, I get that too. At the center,
crazy mindset.
I know. People are like, why are your prices so low? I'm like, so that people in the city can work here.
Exactly.
Like, that's what our goal is. It's not, we are in New Bedford, and on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy because, I mean, a $500 piece of work in New Bedford, not to pick on the area, but it's, I wrote an article for Art Scope magazine about the last commercial gallery we had was Colo Colo, and everything else is alternative space or hybrid or whatever. Yeah. And yet we are named on 4 national, international studies as being in the top whatever, and yet we should have a panel discussion with other people as to, so where is stuff sold, who's it sold to?
Right. Yeah, and I know that would be great to get to kind of know.
I mean, a piece of work, let's work backwards, a piece of work that could be sold in a gallery in Boston, for example, for say $40,000. Now, it's a 50-50 split, so $20,000 to the artist. But now you move down into Providence, and that $50,000 price tag probably dwindles down to $20,000. By the time it gets itself into the city, you're not going to get $10,000 for it. You're not going to get $5,000 for it. Rarely. Rarely. You're lucky to get. And what is the threshold of pain for purchase?
No, yeah, exactly.
So that's an interesting thing to look at.
I know, it is. Yeah, and I run into that a lot in the gallery. It's challenging. It's very challenging. But it's also, I find it, I'm an optimist usually, and I'm really hopeful, and I think that I can see the trajectory like rising and
Right.
kind of gaining this momentum. So in my mind, I just keep kind of like pumping the same juice into it, so it's like keep the flow going.
Just keep the positive,
Yeah.
or the positivity going. Yeah, well, we're getting to that time where we have to wrap this up.
Okay.
Before we go, Dena, is there anything that you'd like to say before we close this?
No, well, I'm excited that you are doing this podcast. I think any form of communication, highlighting the artists in the area and the work that everyone's doing is really important, because a lot of times it's not known. So I'm excited about the project. Yeah.
Thank you.
And yeah, I just look forward to, now that we've kind of gotten off the ground at the Co-Creative Center, to the next few years. I think we'll be able to really dig in and create some stronger programming that can be of access to everyone in the city.
Supportive services, so to speak. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And until the next time, this is Ron Fortier. And thank you, Dena. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.